This is also a time of change for my family.
Balmoral was meant to host a quiet royal dinner, the kind of gathering designed to show unity, discipline, and control. But one face at the entry changed everything. Prince William saw Andrew standing where he was never supposed to be, and within moments, the entire evening collapsed. The future king did not shout. He did something colder. He cancelled the dinner before the first guest could sit down. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had walked into that evening prepared for tension, but not betrayal. He knew Balmoral, the royal family's private Scottish estate, often used for personal gatherings away from formal palace life, was more than a house that night. It was a test. The dinner had been arranged to prove that the family could still sit together, still breathe the same air, still show discipline when the crown needed calm more than comfort. The guest list had been tightened, checked, and quietly guarded, because the crown, the symbol of royal authority and public trust, could not afford another wound opened at the wrong table. William had made his position clear. No presence that could drag the evening backward, no face that could turn unity into embarrassment, no shadow strong enough to darken the room before anyone had spoken. Then Andrew appeared at the entry, steady, expectant, almost too certain. William stopped. Charles saw his son's expression change, and the king understood before a word was spoken that something irreversible had begun. Andrew looked as if he had not forced his way in, and that detail struck harder than any confrontation could have. He seemed invited by confidence, carried forward by the belief that someone inside the palace circle had cleared a path for him. William's shock tightened into quiet fury, not because Andrew had arrived, but because the rules had been broken from within. Charles stood trapped between blood and duty, brother and son, past damage and future survival. The monarch wanted control, but control had already slipped from his hands the moment William turned and gave the order. The Balmoral dinner was cancelled immediately. No toast, no seating, no careful smile to hide the damage. Andrew remained at the edge of a room that no longer had a place for him, while William made the coldest choice of the night. The monarchy would not perform unity at the cost of truth. And as the silence spread through Balmoral, one question became more dangerous than the cancellation itself. Who had opened the door? But before the palace could understand why William acted so fast, it had to face the people standing on every side of the broken dinner table. Every royal crisis has a public face, but this one had several private ones. William carried the anger of a son protecting the future. Charles carried the exhaustion of a monarch trapped by the past. Andrew carried the confidence of a man who believed the door was still partly open. And somewhere behind the silence, Camilla watched the room shift around her. William did not see Balmoral as just another royal residence. He saw it as a test of discipline, inheritance, and survival. Balmoral, the family's private Scottish estate, used for retreats and sensitive gatherings, had become the one place where private choices could quietly shape public trust. The monarchy, meaning the royal system that holds the crown's authority before the nation, could not afford another evening where old scandals walked back in through a side door. Charles knew this too, but the king looked at the dinner differently. To him, the table had been a fragile attempt to keep family order from breaking completely, even if that order demanded painful silence. William felt the betrayal sharply because Andrew's arrival did not look confused. It looked permitted. The prince had given clear boundaries, and now his uncle stood there, with the calm face of a man who believed those boundaries had been softened by someone else. Andrew did not plead. He waited. That confidence made the moment colder. Charles saw it and felt the trap close around him, because Andrew was not only his brother in that instant, he was the past William was trying to stop from poisoning the future. Camilla stayed quiet, but the queen consort understood the room faster than most. She knew the cancelled dinner had exposed more than family anger. It had revealed a power struggle over who could open royal doors, who could bend instructions, and who still believed old influence mattered more than William's command. Her silence was not weakness, it was calculation under pressure. William watched every face around him and understood that the damage had already moved beyond Andrew. Charles looked torn between mercy and duty, but his son had already chosen duty. Andrew's calm expression became the detail no one could forget, because it suggested his return had started before he reached the entry. Camilla felt that danger too, and the king felt it with a grief he could not hide. The broken dinner table had shown them all the truth. This was not just about one man entering Balmoral. It was about the older incident that made him believe he still could. And that confidence did not begin at the doorway. It began weeks earlier, in a private moment that William never forgot. The dinner was cancelled in seconds, but the crisis had been building for weeks. The point of no return came during a closed family briefing at Windsor, when Andrew's name appeared beside a proposed private reconciliation seating plan. William saw it, paused, and asked who had approved it. No one answered quickly enough. That silence became the trigger. William had not entered that briefing looking for war. He had entered, expecting routine control. The kind of quiet family planning that kept difficult names away from dangerous moments. Windsor, the royal home often used for private family decisions and formal planning, had become the place where hidden choices were dressed up as calm arrangements. The private reconciliation seating plan meant a proposed list showing where family members would sit during a future gathering, and Andrew's placement near the senior circle made the prince feel the ground shift under him. It was not just a chair, it was a message. It suggested that someone was trying to bring Andrew slowly back toward the center, without forcing the family to admit what that return would cost. Charles looked at the paper longer than he needed to, and William noticed. The king did not defend the plan at once, but he did not reject it quickly enough either. That hesitation wounded his son more deeply than an argument would have, because it sounded like the old royal habit returning: protect the difficult figure, smooth over the damage, then ask everyone else to carry the public pain. William asked again who had approved Andrew's placement, and the silence around Charles became louder than any answer. Andrew was not in that room, but his shadow was. Later, through a documented account from a senior household note, Andrew learned his name had been discussed beside a future family gathering, and he took that as permission. He believed the door was opening, not because anyone had publicly invited him, but because nobody had slammed it shut when it mattered. That was the buried spark. Balmoral was never the beginning. Balmoral was the explosion. William understood it the instant he saw Andrew at the entry. Calm, ready, almost certain. The prince connected the face at the door to the name on that Windsor paper, and anger hardened into something sharper. Charles had hoped silence could protect the family from another fracture, but his son now saw silence as the fracture itself. Andrew's confidence had been born weeks earlier, in that paused answer and that dangerous seating plan. And when the cancelled dinner left everyone standing in shock, William finally walked toward the person he believed could explain how Andrew got there. William did not rush across the room. That was what made the moment terrifying. He moved with restraint, his face controlled, his words measured, and his anger locked behind royal discipline. Andrew stood near the entry as though waiting to be welcomed. Instead, he was met by the future king, who made clear that Balmoral would not become a stage for quiet forgiveness. William stopped close enough for the message to land without spectacle. He would not let aides soften the exchange, and he would not let protocol hide the truth. Protocol, in royal life, means the formal rules that decide who enters, who speaks, and how public dignity is protected. But this moment was bigger than manners. Andrew tried to frame his arrival as a family matter, something private, something that could be handled quietly once the dinner began. William did not accept that. To him, the entry was not just a doorway, it was a boundary between the monarchy's past mistakes and the future he was trying to protect. The prince looked at his uncle and saw more than a relative asking for mercy. He saw a risk walking calmly toward the table, carrying every headline the crown had fought to survive. Andrew felt that shift almost instantly. His confidence held for a moment, then tightened. The younger generation no longer feared the embarrassment of saying no to him, and William made that clear without raising his voice. Andrew insisted he had been expected. That single word cut through the room. William paused, and the silence around them sharpened. Expected by whom? The question did not need volume, it needed only control. Andrew's face changed because he understood he had said too much. In a recorded household conversation, later preserved in a private account, one senior aide stated that Andrew had been told the dinner would be more forgiving than usual. That phrase became the second crack in the night. William heard it and realized the crisis was moving beyond one man at the entry. Someone close to the household had allowed Andrew to believe that forgiveness had already been arranged, that Balmoral would soften what Windsor had never settled. Andrew tried to recover, but the prince had already seen the truth. This was not a surprise arrival. It was the result of whispered permission, careful wording, and a dangerous belief that old doors could still be opened from the inside. William had confronted his uncle, but now his anger turned toward the hidden hand behind him. Because if Andrew believed forgiveness had already been arranged, then the real question was no longer why he came, it was who made him think he could. Power inside the monarchy rarely announces itself with a raised voice. It moves through seating plans, whispered permissions, altered guest lists, and doors left half open. After the Balmoral dinner collapsed, William focused on one question with devastating precision: who had touched the arrangements? In that question, the palace heard something it had feared for years: the future king was taking control. William asked for the revised list, and the room changed at once. The guest list, meaning the official record of who was cleared to attend a royal gathering, should have protected the dinner from exactly this kind of damage. The private instructions, which were quiet directions given to staff before sensitive family events, should have made Andrew's entry impossible. Yet the final checkpoint had not stopped him. William saw the gap immediately. Someone had not simply forgotten a name. Someone had left space for a late family arrival, and that phrase carried the weight of hidden permission. Charles took the altered list and read it without speaking. The king set it down slowly, and that silence hurt more than a denial. He knew the dinner mattered, because Balmoral was supposed to prove discipline, not expose division. He knew the dinner mattered, because the next reign could not begin with old scandals walking through doors his son had already closed. Camilla felt the danger from another corner of the room. The queen consort understood that soft influence, the quiet pressure that bends decisions without leaving fingerprints, was now being challenged in open air. She did not need anyone to explain what it meant. If William could question Andrew's entry tonight, he could question every hidden arrangement tomorrow. A documented household account later stated that entry staff had been told to expect a late family arrival, and the wording did not come from the prince's office. That was the secret that sharpened the whole night. Andrew's route into Balmoral had not been accidental. His confidence had been fed by a phrase that sounded harmless until it became explosive. William looked at the list again and saw more than a mistake. He saw his command bypassed, his judgment softened, and his future authority tested before the family's eyes. Charles felt the cost of that discovery, because the monarch could no longer pretend this was only about a brother at the door. Camilla felt it too, because the old palace rules had always protected people who knew how to move quietly. Now those rules were cracking, and as the revised list passed from hand to hand, the first real consequence landed not in public, but behind a closed door. The cancellation did not end with empty chairs. It left a silence heavy enough to punish everyone who had entered Balmoral believing the evening could be managed. Charles retreated first, wounded by what his son's decision revealed. Andrew waited for someone to reverse it. Camilla understood faster than anyone that no reversal was coming. William had drawn the line, and the palace had felt it. William gave the order in a voice so controlled it sounded final, before anyone could question it. The Balmoral dinner was formally cancelled, and guests were quietly redirected before the family could pretend the evening still had a purpose. The household, meaning the staff structure that manages royal residences and private events, received a clear instruction. There would be no second attempt, no softer version, no rescheduled table dressed up as unity. This mattered because Balmoral had been chosen to heal appearances, and now it had become the place where appearances broke. It mattered because William was no longer simply reacting as a son. He was acting like the future guardian of the crown's survival. Charles felt that truth settle on him with quiet sadness. The king understood his son's decision was not rebellion, but protection carried out with painful force. Still, it hurt. Andrew stood apart as the room emptied, humiliation pressing harder with every person who avoided his eyes. He waited for Charles to step forward, waited for someone senior to say there had been a misunderstanding, but no rescue came. William then gave the instruction that changed everything. No future family gathering would include Andrew without written approval from his office and the monarch's direct confirmation. Written approval meant a formal recorded permission, not a whisper, not a hint, not a friendly opening left behind a door. That was the revelation. Family access was no longer the same as royal access. Andrew could still be blood, but blood would not automatically bring him back into the places where the monarchy performed trust. Camilla heard the rule and understood the deeper danger. The queen consort knew it could reach beyond Andrew, because once William separated family feeling from royal permission, every quiet influence around the palace became weaker. Charles saw Camilla's stillness, and he knew she understood it too. The old system had protected people through silence, closeness, and careful wording. William had just replaced that with proof, approval, and consequence. Andrew's face changed as the last hope left him. Charles carried the grief, Camilla carried the warning, and William carried the burden of a line that could not be undrawn. But the monarchy could not absorb the shock until father and son faced each other without anyone left to interpret their silence. When Charles and William finally entered the private room, there was no audience left to impress. No courtiers, no careful smiles, no ceremonial language. Just a father who had spent his life carrying the burden of family damage, and a son who believed the next reign would collapse if that damage kept being disguised as compassion. This was not anger anymore. It was inheritance speaking. Charles closed the door first, and the sound seemed to take the last layer of performance out of the room. William stood before him not as a rebel, but as the future king, the next direct heir expected to carry the crown when the monarch's reign ends. The crown, in plain terms, meant more than jewels or ceremony. It meant public trust, national duty, and the family's right to keep serving at the center of British life. William told his father the cancellation was not meant to shame him. It was meant to stop Andrew from turning Balmoral into a quiet symbol of restoration, a place where old damage could be softened by dinner plates and silence. Charles heard the words and looked wounded, because the king knew his son was right and still felt the pain of it. He had hoped the evening might pass without confrontation. He had hoped Andrew could remain a family matter for one night. But William answered with the truth Charles feared most. Silence was exactly how trust had been lost before. The prince's voice did not break, but sorrow lived underneath every sentence. He knew protecting the monarchy now meant disappointing his father. He knew duty could look cold when it was really grief with discipline around it. Charles finally admitted, in a recorded private memorandum later preserved by a senior household secretary, that he had seen the risk before Andrew reached Balmoral. He had seen it, and hoped the family could survive the evening without another wound opening. William did not attack him for that hope. He only made clear he would not inherit it. The next reign, he said, could not be built on doors left half open for the sake of comfort. Charles lowered his eyes, not defeated, but changed. The monarch understood that his son had not cancelled a dinner to seize power. William had done it because power without courage was only decoration. Father and son stood in that silence, both wounded, both aware that love had not saved them from duty. And by morning, what began at one Balmoral doorway had become a national judgment on the monarchy's future. The next morning, Britain did not wake to a quiet family adjustment. It woke to a royal rupture. One newspaper front page showed Balmoral's gates, under a stark headline, "Dinner stopped at the door." Broadcasters repeated the same image all morning: Andrew at the edge of return, William at the edge of reign, and Charles caught painfully between them. William became the name on every tongue before breakfast was over. The prince was praised by some as the only person willing to protect the monarchy from its own weakness. and condemned by others as the man who had turned a family dinner into a national warning. The monarchy, meaning the royal system built on public trust, duty, and inherited authority, suddenly looked less like a family trying to heal and more like an institution choosing survival over comfort. That mattered because Balmoral had always carried emotional weight as a private royal refuge, a place the public imagined as separate from scandal. Now its gates had become the symbol of a line drawn too sharply to ignore. Charles felt the force of that reaction in every carefully worded briefing placed before him. The king was not mocked as much as mourned. Commentators spoke of him as a brother trapped by blood, and a monarch trapped by duty, carrying the pain of Andrew's fall and William's rise in the same breath. A major morning broadcaster framed the moment as the clearest sign yet that William's monarchy has already begun in practice, and that sentence struck the palace like a verdict. William did not need a throne to show command. He had shown it at a doorway. Crowds gathered near the public approach to Balmoral, not cheering, not raging, but waiting with tense curiosity. Some held phones. Some whispered that the future king had done what the past refused to do. Andrew's name moved through the crowd like an old wound reopened, while William's name carried the colder promise of discipline. The palace response came late and careful. It did not deny the cancellation. It only confirmed that the dinner did not proceed, and that was enough. Those 4 words told Britain that the story was real inside palace walls, even if the statement refused to bleed in public. Charles read the line and understood its cruelty. William read it and understood its necessity. Andrew heard it and understood his place had changed. By the time the statement reached the world, the family's emotional verdict had already been reached in silence. Because the true meaning of that night was never found in the headline. It was found in what the monarchy chose to become after the door closed. In the end, the cancelled Balmoral dinner was not about one ruined evening. It was about a monarchy deciding whether blood alone could still open every door. William answered with one decision. Charles absorbed the pain of it. Andrew felt the consequence of it. And the crown, bruised but clearer than before, moved one step away from old protection and one step toward survival. William's cancellation became the final verdict on a crisis that had started with silence and ended with authority. Balmoral, the private Scottish estate where the royal family often gathers away from formal ceremony, became more than a family refuge that night. It became the place where private loyalty finally met public duty, and public duty won. The crown, meaning the symbol of royal power, service, and public trust, could no longer be guarded by pretending every painful face still belonged at every table. William understood that compassion without accountability was not mercy. It was risk, wearing a softer name. The prince did not cancel the dinner because he wanted to wound his father. He cancelled it because the next reign could not inherit the same old habit of smoothing over damage and calling it peace. Charles accepted that truth slowly, and the king's acceptance carried real grief. He saw that his son's firmness was not cruelty, but the necessary shape of the future. The monarch had spent years trying to hold family pieces together, but William had shown that some pieces could not be placed near the center without weakening everything around them. Andrew's defeat was emotional because he arrived believing a door had opened. He left understanding that the old path back had closed. His confidence had depended on memory, rank, and the belief that belonging once meant belonging forever. That belief ended at Balmoral. A documented household summary later described the cancellation as the moment family access and royal access became separate realities, and that became the final revelation without any public decree. No one would return simply because they once belonged. No one would stand near the heart of the monarchy without facing what their presence cost. William carried the burden of that line, Charles carried the sorrow of accepting it, and Andrew carried the humiliation of finally meeting it. The story ended not with comfort, but with clarity. The monarchy survived that night not because the family avoided pain, but because William forced it to face the pain honestly. That night at Balmoral became the moment the monarchy stopped pretending every face at the door deserved a place at the table. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.